Imagine you are 12 years old. At this time you are worried about a math test, or a friend you like but have not dared to say it out loud, or whether your parents will let you stay up late. You are just a child. Now let us turn back 10,000 years, the same 12-year-old child. But in that world, at 12 years old you could already have a husband. You could already be pregnant. You could already be raising a child while you yourself are still a child, and no one around sees that as strange. Why? Seriously think about this for a moment. A 12-year-old child being pregnant is a disaster, a biological disaster, a psychological disaster, a disaster for everything modern science can measure. You would think no society would accept that it is barbaric, it is ignorance, it is a world that has not yet known how to cherish children. But that is not the case, and the reason is not just one thing. There are many layers of explanation, each layer even more unsettling than the previous one. Let us together paint a picture of a survival equation that has been running silently in the foundation of an entire species through hundreds of thousands of years. This goes deeper than you think. Let us begin. Ancient humans as a species have been running a calculation that no one taught, no one coordinated, and no one could refuse. And before talking about that calculation, let us break the myth that almost everyone falls for. You have heard that average life expectancy in ancient times was around 30 years, and therefore everyone had to have children early because they were already in the middle of life. This is one of the most repeated and most misleading statistics in popular history. That number is pulled down almost entirely by catastrophic child mortality. In many pre-modern populations, about 1/3 to 1/2 of children died before 5 years old from disease, malnutrition, accidents, and childbirth complications. But if you survived past age 15, the picture changes completely. Remaining life expectancy jumps dramatically. Many people in ancient times lived to 50, 60, even 70 years old. Grandparents existed, were valued, and as we will see later, may be one of the most important inventions the human species ever made. The logic of everyone is about to die, so reproduce quickly does not hold. Yet here is the interesting part. If it is not because everyone is about to die, then why? The answer begins with a concept that anthropology calls high extrinsic mortality, high death from external forces, not from old age, not from the body gradually breaking down, but from things that could kill you at any moment without warning. Disease, famine, wild animals, violence, childbirth complications. In that environment, evolutionary theory predicts, and real data from many species confirm, when extrinsic mortality is high, organisms shift to reproducing earlier and more. Sturmer and Lummer, in a study published in PLOS One in 2014, surveyed 3 historical human populations in Germany, Finland, and Canada, and found consistent evidence. High mortality environments led to earlier marriage, earlier childbirth, shorter birth intervals. This was not a one-off result. That pattern repeats across cultures, continents, and different periods. For Pleistocene people, 60% died before age 30. Now think about the math. If you wait until 25 years old to have a child, like modern women in many developed countries, you have bet on a 50% chance of never getting to have any. And the deeper reason is the gene mechanism. Each generation, females who gave birth later had fewer surviving children, not because they were inferior, but because they died before they could. The genes of those who gave birth early spread more widely. Over 10,000 generations, that was no longer a trend or a choice. It became the default program etched into the biology of the body. No one decided that. There was no council that voted. There was no culture that coordinated. It was simply that those who gave birth early survived, and those who gave birth late gradually did not leave traces in time. This was not Delia's decision. This was the decision of 10,000 generations before her. Now let us talk about the numbers. Not the shocking numbers, but the real numbers. And it begins in a place you would not expect. The age of first menstruation today in wealthy industrialized countries is around 12 to 13 years old. But here is something few notice. That number has been decreasing over the past 150 years, not increasing. In the middle of the 19th century in Europe, the average was 15 to 16 years old. The meaning of that is that ancient girls reached puberty earlier than 19th century European girls, but much later than modern girls. And that gap is explained entirely by one thing: nutrition. This is the key that almost no one mentions. A girl's body is running a continuous calculation, tracking fat reserves, calorie intake, overall energy levels, because pregnancy and breastfeeding are extremely calorie-demanding processes. A body without enough nutrition will delay puberty as a biological insurance policy, because starting reproduction before having enough energy reserves is a losing bet. Scientists call this the critical fat mass concept. The exact mechanism is still being studied, but the overall pattern is clearly recorded across many populations and history. It explains why girls in malnourished societies reach puberty later than girls who are well fed. And it explains why puberty age changes over time, not because humans change, but because nutrition levels change. When scientists examined bones of Paleolithic people, what did they find? Gluckman and Hansen, in a study published in Molecular and Cellular Endocrinology in 2006, estimated first menstruation in the Paleolithic and Neolithic around 7 to 13 years old, with full reproductive maturity at 11 to 13 years old. An international research group analyzing 13 adolescent skeletons from 7 archaeological sites in Italy, Russia, and the Czech Republic dating from 10,000 to 30,000 years ago, published on Live Science in 2024, found average puberty age around 13 to 14 years old, similar to modern people, confirming this is the genetic blueprint of the species. Lewis in 2020 at the University of Reading analyzing medieval English bones found puberty age 10 to 12 years old, similar to children today. Puberty age did not change over 800 years. What changed was everything else around it. Putting it together, the picture is clear. The biological body of a Paleolithic girl was not abnormally early by any biological standard. It operated according to the blueprint that 200,000 years of evolution had created. What is early or normal depends on the benchmark you compare it to, and that benchmark today is something that has never existed in human history before. Modern people's puberty age is not later than Paleolithic people's. But the age of having children has increased from around 19 to nearly 30 in many developed countries. That 10-year gap between the body being biologically ready and the actual decision to have a child has never existed in the entire history of the human species before. No society was built for that gap. It only appeared very recently, along with modern medicine, stable nutrition, and unprecedented safety in history. Your body is still running the schedule from 28,000 years ago. Only you have decided not to follow it. Everything seems logically reasonable. High pressure, earlier reproduction, body ready for reproduction earlier. It sounds like a neat equation. But it is not neat. It has never been neat. Giving birth when the body is not fully developed carries real and serious risks. Higher rates of obstructed labor, higher maternal mortality rates, higher infant mortality rates. This is not a natural arrangement where everything is fine because it is natural. It was often brutal and it took lives. The important thing is to understand why it was so brutal, and it relates to one of the most uncomfortable evolutionary paradoxes scientists have ever discovered. Around the 20th century, anthropologist Sherwood Washburn described an escape hatch called the obstetrical dilemma. The problem is this: to walk on 2 legs efficiently, the human pelvis evolved to be narrower compared to other primate species. But to have higher intelligence, the fetal brain evolved to be larger. Those 2 trends go in opposite directions and have no clean solution. Grunstra and colleagues in a study published in the American Journal of Biological Anthropology in 2023 showed that human newborns have only 30% of adult brain mass at birth, compared to 40 to 65% in great apes. Human fetuses must be born earlier than other primate species because the head cannot wait to grow larger in the womb without endangering both mother and child. The result is that humans are the only primate species that needs active assistance during birth, not because they are weaker, but because anatomy demands it. And the result of that is that every birth is dangerous in a way that no other animal species experiences in the same way. Lasek and Gorlen in a 2021 study estimated 1 to 2% of prehistoric and hunter-gatherer mothers died in each birth. 1 to 2%. That number sounds small, but think about it another way. If you give birth to 5 children, you have about a 5 to 10% chance of not surviving the entire process of motherhood. Each birth is betting your life. Not a metaphor, that is the real probability. And this is where the paradox becomes truly dark. If giving birth is that dangerous, why did it still happen continuously in every culture, every period, throughout the entire history of the human species? The answer is that reproductive pressure is so strong that it can override even real and serious risks. When the survival of the entire community depends on replacing those who died from disease, violence, and famine, that pressure is not science or theory. It is a force acting on the behavior and physiology of every individual in the community. But there is something even more uncomfortable. Evolution is not a system that cares about individual happiness. It is a system that optimizes the spread of genes across generations. From that perspective, a young mother dying in childbirth but the child surviving is still a success for the system. The genes continue, the chain continues. That is extremely uncomfortable to think about, but that is how it works, and that is why the evolutionary calculation and the personal risk of each specific woman existed in parallel for hundreds of thousands of years, without anything resolving that contradiction. Evolution did not care whether Delia survived that night. It only cared whether the child was born. Those risks of early childbirth, like biological principles, only have value when confirmed by real evidence. And the real evidence here is not mathematical models, not evolutionary theory, but the actual skeletons of real people who died for this reason. French and Noel, in a study published in the Journal of Anthropological Archaeology in 2022, analyzed 33 adolescent skeletons from the Gravettian culture, dating from 35,000 to 25,000 years ago, excavated from 7 archaeological sites in Italy, Russia, and the Czech Republic. They classified each skeleton by sex and age at death, then compared patterns between the two groups. The results for males were normal and predictable. 20% died in the 9 to 13-year-old range, 30% in the 14 to 18-year-old range. The remaining 50% died in the 19 to 29-year-old range. Deaths spread across different age stages in the way you would expect when a dangerous environment strikes anyone at any time. And then they looked at females. 81% of females in the sample died in the late adolescent stage from 19 to 29 years old, not spread evenly like males, concentrated into exactly one single age range. And there was no evidence of violence or disease that could explain this sex difference. No combat wounds on bones, no signs of separate epidemics, no other reasons except one single thing. This is the age when women began their first pregnancy. French and Noel did not stop there. They cross-referenced this result with data from another study on a completely different continent. Pfeiffer and colleagues in 2014 analyzed 246 hunter-gatherer skeletons from the later Stone Age at the Cape of South Africa, published in the International Journal of Paleopathology. In the young adult group, the number of females was 26 and males was 14, nearly twice as many females as males. The same pattern, the same lack of evidence of violence or disease explaining the difference. Pfeiffer concluded that compared to subsequent births, first birth is a risky act, prone to complications due to cephalopelvic disproportion and fetal position. This pattern appeared on 2 different continents tens of thousands of years apart, not a coincidence. It is the mark of the same biological phenomenon occurring at the same age through the same mechanism. Analysis of pelvis bones from many ancient burial sites also shows stress patterns consistent with giving birth before the skeletal frame was complete. The pelvises of adolescent girls record signs of mechanical pressure occurring before it achieved full mature structure, something that was described as a biological principle now confirmed by physical data that can be held and measured. And in the list of those skeletons there is one name, Ostuni 1, a young woman, one of dozens of examples in the sample. Not yet the full story. Not the stopping point for development, just one more piece of evidence in a long list of evidence confirming that what happened to her was not the exception. It was the rule. They were not killed by wild animals. They were not killed by war. Bones do not lie. They were killed by the very process of creating life. Now let us return to that cave. But this time we know more. The previous part showed you the pattern in skeletal data across 2 continents tens of thousands of years apart. But data is data. It has no face. No hand placed on the belly, no one who cared enough about it to arrange a burial ritual while it was dying. This is the moment when the data becomes a human being. In 1991, in a cave named Santa Maria di Agnano in Ostuni, Apulia region, southern Italy, a group of archaeologists excavated a grave dating to about 27,000 years ago. They found a woman. She lay on her left side, her right hand placed on her belly, her head resting on her left palm as if she were sleeping and someone had laid her down that way. A shell bracelet on her right wrist, a hat made of shells and deer teeth covering her head, neat stone tools near her feet. This was not a hasty burial. It was not handling a corpse in chaos or emergency. This was a ritual performed with care and intention. Someone had been there during the time she was dying and had done these things for her. But there was one thing the initial excavation could not reveal. In the area of her pelvis, they found small parts of a fetus. She was pregnant when she died. No one knew much more than that for many decades afterward, until 2017. Neva and colleagues in a study published in Scientific Reports from the journal Nature applied a technique that 27,000 years ago no one could have imagined, called synchrotron X-ray phase contrast microtomography. They took 2 milk teeth of the fetus named Ostomy 1B to the elettrosynchrotron laboratory in Trieste, Italy, and imaged each layer of tooth enamel at a precision higher than any technique before. Tooth enamel forms in layers over time like tree rings. Each period of severe stress in the mother's body or in the fetus's body leaves a visible mark in that structure. And what they found in the tooth enamel of Ostomy 1B were 3 periods of severe physiological stress etched into the enamel during the final 2.5 months of pregnancy, severe enough to interrupt the tooth enamel development process of the fetus still in the womb. Gestational age at death, 31 to 33 weeks, not full term. Both mother and child did not survive. Modern science has lifted the veil, and we look inside 27,000 years of history and see 3 periods of physiological crisis that a mother and her unborn child went through together in the final weeks before both were lost. But here is what we do not know. We do not know if this was her first pregnancy. We do not know her real name. We do not know what she did the day before. We do not know if she had anyone by her side that night. We do not know if she was afraid. Archaeologists named her Delia. That is our name for her, not her name. She may have had her own name in a language we will never understand. Delia was not an exception. French and Noel found this pattern in 33 Gravettian skeletons. Pfeiffer found it in 246 South African skeletons. Each example in those samples is a real person with a real life that we will never know. Delia is the only one among them that we were able to name. We named her Delia, but she is just one of very many who had no name at all. But if giving birth is that dangerous, why did the human species still survive? Humans are the only primate species that needs active assistance during birth, not because they are weaker, but because anatomy demands it. A narrow pelvis combined with a large fetal head means giving birth alone is an action that is almost impossible to perform safely. Other species can do it because their structure allows it. The human structure does not. And a species that cannot give birth safely on its own has only 2 choices, either go extinct or evolve the ability to support each other. The human species chose the second. Human females are an extremely rare exception among mammals. They go through menopause and then live another 30 to 40 years. Most other species do not do this. From a pure evolutionary perspective, once there is no longer direct gene transmission, there is no selective pressure to keep you alive. So why do human females live long after menopause? Hawkes and colleagues propose the grandmother hypothesis. Grandmothers who no longer give birth shift to raising grandchildren, freeing young mothers to reproduce again sooner because they do not have to nurse until 4 to 5 years old like great apes. Grandmothers raise grandchildren, mothers reproduce again, total surviving grandchildren increase. Over many generations, lineages with grandmothers living after menopause had more grandchildren than those without, and that created selective pressure, a phenomenon no other primate species expresses as clearly as this. But grandmothers are only one layer in the network. In many traditional and ancient societies, raising children was the work of the entire village. Grandmothers, aunts, experienced women shared the burden in ways other species do not have. A 12 to 13-year-old girl in an ancient community did not do it alone. She was surrounded by a network of people who had done this before her, people who knew what she did not yet know. And that network was not a product of civilization. It was not something that appeared when humans began building cities or writing laws. It appeared long before all of that, for a very simple reason. A species with a pelvis too narrow to give birth safely had to evolve to never give birth alone. The village was not an invention of civilization. It was an invention of the woman in labor. Now let us be honest about what the picture above is simplifying. If you hear everything from the beginning until now and conclude that ancient women all gave birth at 12 years old, then you have just fallen into exactly the type of thinking error that this piece is trying to break. Not everyone did that. It was never that way. Take the Hadza group in Tanzania and hunter-gatherer communities in the Amazon, populations studied by modern anthropologists as proxies for the way of life of ancient hunter-gatherer groups. In those populations, average age at first birth is near 18 to 19 years old, not 12. The reason is the critical fat mass mechanism described earlier. High nutritional stress, strong physical activity, low body fat causes the body to delay puberty and lengthen the gap to first birth. This is not an exception to the rule. It is the rule operating under specific conditions. The number 12 is not a common threshold for the entire human species throughout history. It is the output of an equation, and that equation gives different results when the variables change. Rome gives another example in the opposite direction. Roman law set the minimum marriage age at 12 for females and 14 for males. The number 12 was written into law as a valid threshold. But legal marriage age was not actual childbirth age. Historical evidence shows many Roman brides, especially in the elite class, actually married in late teens rather than right at the minimum age. The important thing is not the number 12 in the law. The important thing is that 12 being considered a valid threshold reveals a truth about that world. There was no large protected buffer period between children and adults as we understand it today. Either young children needing care or adults in training, nothing in between. Agriculture created a third paradox. Grain surplus provided more calories but less nutritional diversity compared to hunter-gatherer diets. Average health of common people could be worse. But at the same time, new socioeconomic dynamics appeared. Inheritance, alliances, property, creating cultural incentives for earlier marriage, especially for women from elite classes who could use marriage to strengthen alliances or secure land. One step of civilization created two opposite consequences at the same time, making some women healthier and making some other women marry earlier for reasons unrelated to biology. But all those variations revolve around one common axis. When the environment and social conditions change, the age of childbirth changes accordingly. And today's environment has changed more than at any point in human history. Improved medicine, stable nutrition, increased life expectancy, extrinsic mortality reduced to a level that Pleistocene people could never have imagined. Environmental fast life history pressure is almost gone. But genes did not get the memo. There is no email, no automatic update. It is still running the program written in a world that has disappeared. The body is still running old software. The world has upgraded the operating system. No one asked for your gene's opinion. The same study by Gluckman and Hansen records something that few notice the implication of. They wrote that for the first time in 200,000 years of human history as a species, humans reach sexual maturity before being equipped psychologically to function as adults in society. This is not a personal opinion, not a cultural comment. This is a scientific conclusion, and its implication is more uncomfortable than anything mentioned from the beginning until now. Throughout the entire previous history of the human species, there was no 10-year buffer between children and adults. Either young children needing care or adults in training, nothing in between designed as a protected zone. Once the body was ready, the social machine pushed you into marriage and reproduction relatively quickly, because a society without antibiotics, without modern obstetric medicine, without food security could not afford the luxury of delay. Modern extended adolescence is a product of prosperity and safety, improved nutrition, reduced child mortality thanks to vaccines and hygiene and medicine, an economy that no longer needs every family member to work from a young age. All of that created a buffer that no generation in 200,000 years of human history could have imagined could exist. But here is the problem. The entire social structure was designed on the assumption that biological maturity and psychological maturity occur at the same time. The education system, the legal system defining adults, the social healthcare system, all were built for a species where those 2 points coincide, but they no longer coincide. Puberty age is earlier in modern children. Social adulthood age is increasingly later. That gap is widening, and no one designed this. It just happened because evolution and civilization are pulling in opposite directions for the first time in human history. We are the first generation that must live in that gap, and we do not yet know what to do with it. Let us return to the starting point. You are 12 years old, worried about a math test, or a friend you like but have not dared to say it out loud, or whether your parents will let you stay up late. But this time look back at that image with everything you just learnt. The fact that you are worried about a math test instead of being pregnant at that age is not obvious. It is not natural. It is not something that always existed. It is the result of a chain of evolutionary, medical, and social changes spanning thousands of years, and it is more fragile than you think. It requires modern medicine. It requires food security. It requires a world where extrinsic mortality has decreased low enough to afford the luxury of a 10-year buffer. Before all of that appeared, 12 years old meant something completely different. Everyone reading this piece is a descendant of a continuous chain of ancestors who survived and reproduced successfully in precisely those harsh conditions. Somewhere in your genetic history there was very likely a young mother, possibly a teenager, who bet her life giving birth and won, while many others in similar positions did not win. They went through the obstetrical dilemma. They faced a 1 to 2% probability of death with each birth. They gave birth in a world where 60% of people died before age 30 and still found a way to leave traces. Delia did not win, but someone did win, and that is the reason you are listening to this. Because she did not give up. If this story makes you look at yourself in a different way, please subscribe to the channel because there are many more stories like this waiting to be told. Each video is one time we dig deeper into truths that science has discovered, but few notice the real implications of.